BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNid88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And welcome to BBOR, the home of true crime talk radio and your premier destination for unsolved mysteries, criminal psychology, and exploring the dark side of cyberspace. My name is Ned DeHaan, and I am your host, as well as the creator of AstroPsych 400 here on YouTube, and regular contributor to the Zodiac Killer channel. And a great way to support these shows is just by listening to some more content. But you can also go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse, written by me, Ned DeHaan. It is a novel, murder mystery, inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is indeed fictional. However, who doesn't love a good mystery? And there is always the Teespring page. Feel free to check out some of the merchandise. And remember, being weird is not a crime. Let the show begin. Alright, hello everybody. Today is Friday. Another Anything Goes Friday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? I hope everyone's doing well. And it is now October, and this is mostly a true crime channel, but for the month of October, I thought that for the Anything Goes Friday, I could talk about something that is a little bit lighter and get back to the world of movies. There are several episodes about films here on Black Box Online Radio, and last year I did one episode on horror films. But this year I'd like to focus on the Halloween franchise, because Halloween Ends has just come out on Peacock and in theaters. I have the Peacock streaming service, so that's how I watched it. Last year, though, for Halloween Kills, I did go into the theater for that one, and it was the first time in a long time that I had been to the theater, but I've noticed that movie theaters might be a dying art when we have so many things available at home, but I love the experience. I mean, firstly, not only popcorn, but also milk duds. You gotta have them both at the same time. And I'm a West Virginian, so at my local theater, we sell pickles. I think that's really weird, but do they do that at your theater? Anyway, the Halloween franchise is perhaps one of the most iconic in all of horror history, and I think there are several reasons for that, but I'd also introduce this subject by saying that my first exposure to the Halloween franchise was when I was in the video store growing up, and this must have been about 96, 97, and for 2 years, every Friday we go to the video store, and I saw this cassette of Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers, and it said, the scariest Halloween of them all, and I was always just looking at it. Maybe I picked up the case a few times, the way we did at the video store, and I was like, what on earth is this? Who on earth is Michael Myers? And it really wasn't until I was a teenager that I actually got around to watching the Halloween films. Firstly, I knew someone who was very passionate about them. He talked about them a lot. And just once by chance, I happened to catch Halloween 5 on AMC. And I know it sounds kind of weird to jump into the 5th movie in a series as the first one that you've watched, but because he had been talking to me about them, I decided to give it a try. And I only saw the last 25 minutes of the movie, and I thought that it was really good. I had no idea that Halloween 5 was such a dud, but I was hooked from there. I wanted to see more. I wanted to know more, and I just wanted to watch all the movies. And I rented Halloween, the first film, John Carpenter's, from 1978, and I was a little bit underwhelmed by it, because I think I just expected that there would be more action and a more solid resolution. Everybody that I had talked to after watching that said that they were just absolutely in love with Halloween from 1978 and the story of Michael Myers, and they just said that the first film scared the crap out of them. So from that point onward, I began to give the film another try, and it was really, again, the AMC channel that did a lot of promos for it, talking about all of the simplistic nature of it, the minimalist nature of it, yet still finding horror in some very odd places. Just the scene design, the eerie feelings that have been created, like the vibes that get put out, just from the basic and simple imagery. And of course, the Halloween film not only introduces us to the serial killer Michael Myers, who wears a blank, expressionless mask, but also the character of Dr. Sam Loomis, played by Donald Pleasance in the original Halloween films. And I think that there is a certain sincerity in Donald Pleasance's performance, because Michael Myers is the serial killer who doesn't talk, but he's also a mental patient who escapes from the mental hospital on more than one occasion, and he goes on to terrorize the town of Haddonfield. But Dr. Sam Loomis is just that. He's Michael Myers' psychiatrist. However, he comes across as someone who almost plays a game of mental chess with the serial killer, and he is not always successful. But when you listen to some of the ramblings and the speeches and just the entire performance that was put on by Donald Pleasance, it's so sincere. I mean, I even begin to believe it myself. I know that these actors have very large personalities, and they have very charismatic and engaging personalities, but it just begins to feel real at that point. However, I also think that Dr. Loomis is somebody who, as I said, he has some very conflicting issues, because as a doctor, he is practically trying to destroy his own patient, and he's not even referring to as a human. He calls him evil on two legs, and at one scene in Halloween 5, he's even trying to beat Michael Myers senseless, just screaming the word, "Die, die, die." And there are different stages in the Halloween franchise, because, as I understand, originally they wanted to create something similar to the Twilight Zone, but done in film format. That's why Halloween 3 is called Season of the Witch, and it doesn't feature Michael Myers. It's the wonderful story of Silver Shamrock. However, what they didn't understand was at the time that people actually want to see the same thing over and over again. And I do cite the phraseology of a particular documentary. And Halloween 1 and 2 follow the story of Michael Myers trying to kill someone named Laurie Strode. And then Halloween 3 has its own unrelated storyline. Then you get to Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, which is a very well done film. I mean, when I was watching that, like, recently, I've seen it so many times, and I just cannot get over how well done that is for a sequel. I'm like, that's a well done piece of horror cinema. And even though I had a strong connection to the movie Halloween 5 because it introduced me to the franchise, when I was watching that back to back with Halloween 4, I thought, that is not very good. It's a little bit dorky. They used a very odd Michael Myers mask, and they used an absolutely different set design completely. The house that Michael Myers grew up in suddenly changes from some sort of suburban residential dwelling to a type of Victorian manor, and everybody noticed that, even people who only had a small familiarity with the series. So then after that, though, they had the film Halloween: The Curse of Michael Myers. I finally got around to watching that one throughout my Halloween saga, and I hated that film. I hated it. Some people do not understand that less is more, because in the previous segments, as I said, there's this killer named Michael Myers who wears a blank, expressionless mask, and there was something that was so mysterious about his presence, about why he did the things that he did, about the forces that would drive him to commit these crimes, and why only on certain occasions. Because during the majority of his life, he is just a catatonic human being who really has no function. He doesn't speak. He just lives in a mental hospital, and he is not engaging with other people, but on certain occasions he breaks out into these fits of serial killer rage. And they explained all this in Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers, the sixth installment in the series, and their explanations were absolutely terrible, and it features some Paul Rudd-looking character, and he, that was sarcasm, by the way, and he just provides all these explanations about why Michael Myers did what he did, and I thought that it was just so much better if they would have left it up to the imagination. This brings us to Halloween H2O, also known as 20 Years Later, because the first Halloween film came out in 1978, and then in 1998, 20 years later, they did another one with Jamie Lee Curtis, who played Laurie Strode in the first two films. And it's not a bad film, it's a decent piece of horror cinema. It has what I guess you would call a reboot of the timeline, and it's some true exposure on how fictional stories can have their timelines reshaped. They can introduce new characters, they can retell the story in a different way, and the Halloween franchise would be known to do that. So Halloween H2O wasn't so bad, but then they introduced Halloween Resurrection, featuring the wonderful Busta Rhymes, and I don't know if you guys remember this, but they used to do these Mountain Dew commercials with Busta Rhymes, and this guy would be chasing him on a bike saying, "Wait, Busta, wait!" And that's what I was thinking about the entire time when I was watching Halloween Resurrection, and that is one of the worst movies ever made, period. But you couldn't just leave a franchise at that. They also rebooted the series in 2018 with Halloween, which did something that was rather controversial because they cut out all the other storylines after the first film. Like, it's just based on the first film, and then it restarts the series 40 years after that happened. And I think they could have done something so much better. And if they're going to have this idea that, again, the serial killer terrorized the town of Haddonfield, they could have used the events up to Halloween 5, but just cut out certain material, like there's a cliffhanger ending, and there are some additional characters that are used in Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers. They could have cut out all of that, and then they could have done it in a very specific way, also introducing Jamie Lee Curtis's character in a particular manner to really show that this person terrorized the town and that he was a real threat, because in the most recent trilogy of films, Michael Myers went on a kill spree one time in 1978, and I know they wanted to present the image that, all right, it's the story, it's the creation of fear that was instilled in the people, and this legend has been told over and over again, and they didn't want it to happen again, that he was just living in the hearts and minds of people. However, they could have really shown that it was a reoccurring threat, because Halloween 4 was released in 1988, so that's 10 years after the first one, and that shows about how, again, Michael Myers is a mental patient, he escapes from the mental hospital once again, and he's coming back to terrorize the town. So they could have showed that it was an ongoing threat, and really about how fearful the town should have been. I think that would have made a little bit more sense, other than one guy committed a crime spree in 1978 one time, yet the town is just so completely afraid of him 40 years after the fact. I thought that was a little bit too much. And also other critics have pointed out that there are just so many missed opportunities in the most recent trilogy of films, Halloween, Halloween Kills, and Halloween Ends. In Halloween Kills, I was almost tempted to walk out of the theater because I thought that it was just missing the mark. It was a little bit silly. You have this mob that is going around trying to kill Michael Myers, but because he wears a mask, they don't know what he actually looks like, and it was a little bit too far out for its own good, and they're chanting, "Evil dies tonight." Yet, the most recent trilogy also did not quite show how Michael was able to survive all of the horrible things that happened to him, such as like being burned alive or just being overcome with excessive brute force. They allude to it, saying there's no way he's a mortal man, someone cannot survive such things like that. But then they go on in Halloween Ends to challenge that narrative, and that's not completely clear to the audience about what is the reason and ability that Michael Myers can always survive these terrible things that happen to him. And by terrible, I just mean bodily harm. He is, of course, supposed to be some type of evil incarnate, and a lot of that is explained in the original films, in, again, Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers. Not giving any spoilers, but it's a terrible, terrible explanation. On the one hand, it can be left up to the imagination, but in Halloween Ends, they really deviated from that, and they're trying to explore his mortality as opposed to his abilities. And if you do watch the film Halloween Ends, it really felt like three different films stitched together, and it wasn't very impressive, because there's this entire side story of an individual named Corey Cunningham, who is a budding serial killer that is interacting with Michael Myers. And even though it was mildly interesting to see what Michael Myers would be like if he either had a partner or some type of leech, for lack of a better term. I know that sounds weird, but someone who is just riding off of Myers' abilities and trying to use the situation for his own advantage. And there was somewhat of a parasitic relationship between the two of them. But all of that was just unrelated to the main story. They could have done that Corey Cunningham thing in just 3 or 4 minutes, but they chose not to. They could have just had a little bit of an introduction, and then they could have continued back to the stuff that the viewers actually wanted to see. Now, that is one major storyline of Halloween involving Jamie Lee Curtis and some of the other characters. There's the Jamie Lee Curtis mostly doesn't appear in Halloween 4 and 5. She is only present in a photograph, and it's based on the story of her daughter named Jamie Lloyd. Now her character's name is Laurie Strode, and they created this character named Jamie Lloyd, who is carrying on Jamie Lee Curtis's namesake, for lack of a better term. Now, the same actress, Danielle Harris, who plays Jamie Lloyd, is used in the Rob Zombie reboots that were done around 2008 and 9, Halloween and Halloween 2. Another perfect example of missed opportunities, but in a different way, because Danielle Harris plays a different character. Her character is named Annie Brackett in those two films, which again is an attempt to restart the storyline, and it was an attempt to show Michael Myers in a different way, as well as other characters that I've talked about, such as Dr. Sam Loomis. He is presented in a completely different light, but it was not very impressive for the following reasons. It's definitely very gory for its own sake, but it didn't contribute to the storyline. Secondarily, they presented Michael Myers as not exactly a shapeless serial killer, or maybe just like a shape with no real personality. They turned him into some type of huffing and puffing and grunting, lumbering giant who just kind of roams about the countryside, and he is someone who was way more expressive. And I also recently watched Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, and I've now completed the entire franchise. That was the last film that I needed to see, and I saw it on Peacock as well. And it's all about white horse symbology, and I'm fascinated by that. I'm Ned DeHaan, the author of the book Killer on a White Horse, which talks about a fictional serial killer called the White Horse Killer. Absolutely unbeknownst to me at the time that stuff was discussed in Halloween 2. I saw Halloween 2, Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, just 3 days ago, But there's a reason why the book is called Killer on a White Horse, and there's a fictional serial killer called the White Horse Killer, because those literary themes are used over and over again, like the way the Zodiac Killer wasn't an original idea. The person or people who created that persona that was used in the 1960s were borrowing all types of ideas from different sources, and I'll be discussing some of that on the next Zodiac Monday. Every Monday is Zodiac Monday here on Black Box Online Radio, and I'll be looking at some of the connections between the Zodiac Killer and the New Orleans Axeman, because I must have been walking through life with either rose-tinted glasses or like those black ice glasses that let in only 5% of visible light into your retinas and so on, because I didn't see it in the past, the connections between the Zodiac and the Axeman, but I'll be exploring that in the next episode. But for now, I would like to focus on Halloween 2, where they used all of these things about how Michael Myers can communicate, or he has like memories and visions of relatives, as well as the white horse as a sign of comfort to him. And the white horse is used in numerous pieces of literature, even talking about the Book of Revelations, where the pale horse is the one running wild and spreading destruction, which is one of the reasons why William Cooper titled his book Behold a Pale Horse, which has become the foundations of countless conspiracy theories and exploring the functions of the government. And the Pale Horse even makes a brief appearance in Killer on a White Horse, paying homage to William Cooper. But that's the whole point. It's a recurring theme in various forms of literature. So, Rob Zombie's films were trying to present the story in his own light, and I know they wanted Rob Zombie to do it in some type of overdone music video kind of presentation, but it absolutely distracted everyone from the story, and it would have been so much better if it had been just a similar serial killer story, but not the story of Michael Myers. Because maybe if they had done it in just how the film Halloween from 1978 was the inspiration to commit the crimes, and by the end of Halloween 2, Michael Myers is barely wearing a mask. He's extremely expressive, with particularly the emotion in his eyes, so to speak. And that film also heavily explored his mortality. And they also took a wonderful horror film character, Sam Loomis, and then presented him as a media-hungry individual who loved publicity, who was selling a true crime book and going on a book tour, and even does a talk show with Weird Al Yankovic, and they tried to make fun of him, and it was all unnecessary. But again, that's a deviation and a distraction. And I'm quite curious, though, what the new set of films is going to do in the future. I mean, I really think they're going to be doing more with the character of Michael Myers, and they're probably going to explore the series in different ways. But there's a film called The Town That Dreaded Sundown that was released in the 1970s, and it talks about the Phantom Killer, an unidentified serial killer who operated in 1946 in the town of Texarkana. And they redid the film in 2014 under the same name, The Town That Dreaded Sundown, and I was expecting a pure reboot, just like a pure remake, just an updated version. But it was really quite different. It's talking about how somebody may have been inspired by the film from the 70s to recreate a set of crimes in Texarkana. And it's done in somewhat of an awkward way. The detective in that one is played by Anthony Anderson, who I know is a detective on Law and Order, but I just think of him as Andre Johnson on the show Blackish. He's really become attached to that role. He'll do other things though. He's a funny guy, but that's just it. He's a very comical persona, and he was playing somewhat of a comedic investigator named Lone Wolf Morales, not Lone Wolf Gonzalez, but Lone Wolf Morales. Lone Wolf Gonzalez was a real person, though, who investigated the Moonlight murders. But I think that Halloween could do something like that. People who were inspired by particular types of films, and maybe if someone were to try and turn themselves into a Michael Myers copycat, or even if just like they could even show how this concept of just being wearing this blank mask becomes a serial killer movement, a serial killer gang. It could evolve in a lot of ways. And I know this is going to sound really weird, but if you ever watch the show Batman Beyond, it talks about an older Bruce Wayne who is advising a new Batman named Terry McGinnis, and they have Batman's arch nemesis, the Joker, who is then brought back. But not only that, there are just these gangs called the Jokers, and there are multiple people who have been inspired by the Joker. And I don't even want to say the Joker, because there are at least 3 Jokers in Batman lore, and that's a very complicated storyline in itself. And I think, though, that villains like Michael Myers, like the Joker, and even like Jason Voorhees and Freddy Krueger, they are very entertaining to watch on film. So they can show how characters can be recreated into new characters and new, even states of being. Like, you don't even have to have a new Michael Myers. You could show how there's going to be a movement of people who have been inspired by this character to go on and keep committing destructive actions, and, I mean, more or less creating serial killer operations in a new way. And I think there's going to be some of that in the future, except they're probably going to do it in a much more entertaining way than what I just rambled on about. But what do you think about the Halloween franchise? Please share your ideas in the comments section down below. Now, as far as the first 2 films go, I really think that Jamie Lee Curtis was establishing herself as a scream queen, because she also went on to the film Prom Night, and she was definitely good at playing the victim. But then Danielle Harris plays her fictional daughter, Jamie Lloyd, in Halloween 4 and 5, and she absolutely sold the role. I think that's the reason why I was such a fan of those 2 films, and I still am, is because Danielle Harris just gave such an amazing performance. And, some people even ask questions about what is it like for these children to just play these characters that are being terrorized and traumatized and being hunted down by a serial killer. And I discussed this a lot when I did an episode on the film Detainment, which is about the murder of James Bulger. And someone just simply said, some child actors are extremely talented, and you just leave it at that they're very good at putting on the emotional performances, and the crying scenes, the angry scenes, the terrified scenes, all of that. And I think, though, that the only saving grace of the most recent set of films, particularly in Halloween Ends, is that there were definite moments when they're paying homage to previous films in the franchise. Like, I recognize that's almost like a reference to Halloween 5 in this particular scene, or that's a reference to Halloween 6. I didn't like the film at all, but I know what they're referring to. So fans of the movies can see certain things in a particular way where other people would just see an ordinary horror film. But that was something else that was also very hard to accept, that the most recent films, Halloween, Halloween Kills, and Halloween Ends, were just based on previous, based on the first film, and they excluded all the previous storylines. So they had Jamie Lee Curtis as just a woman who was attacked by Michael Myers one time, and then she spends a lifetime preparing for him to come back. It would have been more convincing if they had included at least the story of Halloween 2, or if they had tied in some of the events in a twisted way in Halloween 4 and 5, and talked about how, well, I don't even want to give any spoilers away, but they could have made it work, because then they could have shown that he actually was some type of consistent threat in her life. I mean, he attacks her one time, and then she spends her entire life waiting for him to come back. Not very not very impressive based on the lack of particular damage that was brought about. But an interesting thing, though, is people always want to point out that Michael Myers is actually wearing a William Shatner mask that was painted white for the original Halloween film. But one thing that was disputed by John Carpenter as well as the special effects team and the makeup team on Halloween is that they did not use a William Shatner mask. They said very clearly it was a Captain Kirk mask from Star Trek that did not look anything like William Shatner, and that was painted white, and that became the mask that Michael Myers wears. And he is often referred to as the Shape when the mask is on, and I just think that there is something so creepy about that, and a lot of that just ties into the establishment of a strong horror character. But some people just simply love slasher films because of not only the carnage, but also the mystery involved with a character. And I found that Michael Myers is a much more sympathetic horror villain than some of the other ones out there, such as Jason Voorhees or Freddy Krueger, Leatherface. They have explanations about why they are the way they are, but Michael Myers is just, again, supposed to be this sad little boy that turned into a man, and he is extremely destructive, but we don't completely know why until they tell you why, and then you're like, oh, that's a horrible explanation. But do you have any favorite film in the franchise? Do you have a favorite sequel? Because most people would just say Halloween 1978. I would too, because if it weren't for that one, we wouldn't have anything else. And I told you I loved Halloween 4. I think I would propose that would be the best sequel. And Rob Zombie's Halloween films, missed opportunities. The most recent Halloween trilogy, missed opportunities as well. That's my take on the subject. What do you think? You can put your ideas in the comment section down below. Anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio, AudioWell.com, and can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box, and there is always BlackBoxNed88 over on Instagram. See you there for the bonus podcast. Until next time.